Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your attendance today. We may have some other people coming in as lunch has just ended. Hopefully they will. I'm sorry we're starting a few minutes late to give people a chance to come over. But I am Mike Thibodeau. I work on the fraud and identity team at Experian. I've been in the fraud and identity business for about 30 years now. Experian the last 7. Where I lead a team of sales engineers who talk to clients of all sorts, including the agencies here, about fraud and identity problems. And so we have a good point of view, I guess, about what's going on in the market, what people are dealing with, the kinds of fraud vectors they're encountering, and the way that they're trying to solve those problems. So that's what I hope to talk to you about today. If you came here expecting an Experian sales presentation, you're not going to get that. So I know you're disappointed. But so I started my career kind of in digital fraud. I was working for a big bank, and I was managing fraud solutions for check processing, basically. And they came to me and they said, "Hey, we're about to start this new thing called home banking, and wonder if you could write some reports and some monitoring for us here." So kind of at the ground floor of, starting what was going on in the internet and in digital banking anyway, and digital identity at that point. The last few years, as I said, at Experian has given me a great opportunity to talk to clients of different sorts and to see that these same problems that you're facing are actually very similar to the problems that people in other verticals are facing. I'm not a real banker. I'm more of a fraud and identity person, I guess. And those experiences and the things that we're encountering and hearing really translate across all the different verticals. We do appreciate, the public sector and the agencies and the kind of the discipline that you bring to the table. Because where you have tried to at least triangulate on some common practices and common standards, that's an aspiration for a lot of the other clients I have. And they definitely learn from the standards that you're creating. And so keep up the good work. Appreciate that. But when you talk to big banks, credit unions, fintechs, buy now, pay laters, healthcare providers, pharmacies, all of these different companies we speak with, you're going to see that they encounter the same problems, especially in the digital environment. The last few years have really changed the landscape in a lot of ways, right? The pandemic forced us to move ahead with our digital transformation to accelerate that, and in some ways get out ahead of the control environment. And this has been probably the biggest challenge across the board in the last few years. The attack vectors you've heard of, automated attacks, phishing attacks, some of the new NIST guidance that's come out and has referenced some of those attack vectors are certainly being seen everywhere, right? And so today we're going to talk about, in the brief time we have, sort of a framework that I've seen work personally, as I was kind of in your seats and protecting an organization and the people we served, as well as from my point of view with Experian. And so it's going to be a framework and a construct that you can consider and think about in terms of your own environment and your own organization, and hopefully it will help you. But really it's around how do you develop measurements and definitions and ongoing tracking and understanding of the problems that you're facing in a way that you can track it over time, you can explain the trends up and down, you can identify areas where you may be under attack, where you can talk to stakeholders internally about it in a way that's informed in analysis and in kind of agreed upon set of definitions. And that's really what I came to talk to you about today. So at the end, we'll have some time for some questions. Would love for you to pepper me with any questions you may have, and I'll do my best to answer it. But really, we're trying to define what is success. What are the key metrics that you need to be paying attention to to be able to express how well or how poorly you're doing with your identity program. What are the strategies that you might employ to kind of get to an optimal level of performance, and then the ongoing measurement as well. I saw that was another key factor in the new guidance that's being considered, that there should be this ongoing measurement, right? And it should be informing you and allowing you to evolve your strategies and change over time. And that's an area that a lot of my clients get stuck in. Most of them are fairly good at assessing the risk of a new process up front. What do I need to do to mitigate the risk? Some of them are decent at creating ongoing metrics that they're going to continually review and monitor. Very few are good at building a platform that allows them to take the evidence they get out of those measurements and the actions that they need to take and be able to quickly deploy those. And in the digital environment, that is really key and critical, because the attack vectors change rapidly. And the criminals show up one day and they hit you with a ton of volume and an automated attack, and they wait for you to respond, and then they're on to the next target, right? And they keep coming back and circling back to you with the new attack methods. So in terms of the goals, this is sort of the baseline, right? You try to establish the goals. What are you trying to achieve, with your program? And none of these are really new. These are probably very consistent with what you had even in the offline, servicing environment, call center environments. But you want to reject imposters, people that are claiming to be someone that they're not. You want to accept valid identities, right? And these two things hang in balance with one another, because they're sort of in tension with one another, right? You could reject all the imposters if you rejected everyone, but that's not what we're here to do. That's not your mission, right? And so finding the right balance between rejecting the bad people but allowing the good citizen to go through and get the service that they need without a lot of friction is really the balance that we're trying to find. That goes along with accessibility, usability. Some of the recent dialogue around equity would kind of play into that as well. But these top three lines are really the ones that we typically focus on in the in this discipline, and they kind of sit in balance with intention with one another as you try to manipulate the strategy and find the best place for that. The bottom two are ones that sometimes go overlooked. System flexibility and agility. I mentioned this just a minute ago. You need to have a system that has levers that you can push and pull to change as as the environment changes, as your attack vectors change. Perhaps you see some attribute match rate suddenly goes south and you need to make a change. You need to have a platform and a control environment that lets you react to that flexibly and quickly. And then financial impacts. Sometimes the impacts you have from fraud are not measured in terms of credit card loss and things like that. I get that. But there's still actual costs, even operational costs, right? If you're in a digital environment and you put up too much friction, those people are going to leave. They're going to complain. They're not going to get the service they need, or they're going to go to another channel that may be, higher cost for you. And so there are costs all around there. Obviously, other sorts of costs, reputational costs, and things like that you want to recognize as well as part of the impact of fraud, and system costs. So you have a lot of partners like Experian and others that are in the room that have great tools that can plug in and help you solve problems, but there's a cost associated with those as well, right? And so you want to have the best capabilities kind of just in time, at the right moments, the right places in your experience that you're creating and in your model, right? But you don't want to overpay for a bunch of redundant solutions or solutions that have become obsolete and aren't delivering, right? But if you find that a solution is not delivering, but you don't have the flexibility to change it, you'll get stuck with it, right? And this is sort of the world that I lived in for a long time before coming to Experian. So when we think of metrics, one of the reasons that metrics are really important is that it gives us a common framework for conversation internally. So when you go to your team internally and try to get investment to do something or make a change or try to make the case to make a change, if you've already established some baseline metrics and a conversation has already been going on, you've had an ongoing cadence about specific KPIs, KRIs, then it's a much easier conversation to have. Look, we're having a fraud problem here. It's evidenced by these metrics that we've been looking at for months and months, and now you see the trend line change up or down, right? So those sorts of metrics are really important to establish them and kind of keep some of these ideas in mind as you do that. I know you all have reporting, but as you think about the reporting you have, I would kind of use this maybe as a sounding board of, are the metrics you're using today, do they achieve these sorts of goals in terms of defining? And as you create new metrics, I would apply this as well. But it should be something that's readily understood. Everyone that's in the room talking about these measurements should have a working knowledge of what the metric means, right? And a lot of times our measurements are so complex, I guess, that they're a little hard to explain. In my world, and this was even listed again in that NIST document, but in my world I hear about synthetic identities all the time, right? And someone will rush in and say, what's a synthetic identity? And you need to have a working knowledge and something that's readily understandable by most people, at least all the people in the conversation. Some will be fraud people, some will be identity people, maybe cybersecurity people, and then executive management as well. They all need to have a working knowledge of what you're talking about when you say this measurement has deteriorated or improved. It needs to be something that's repeatable, and it can't take a ton of effort and a ton of manual effort, right? And doing something that's a one-off measurement, while that's fine for research purposes, what I'm talking about, this kind of ongoing sort of technique of monitoring, needs to be something repeatable. You can do it on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, whatever those frequencies are, and you can do it consistently the same way every time, right? So that sort of goes to data plan as well. So you want to be very clear about how are you going to get to this metric each time. Defensible. So the best approach when creating some measurements, in my view, is to have a good, solid conversation with a lot of naysayers up front. Let everyone pick apart the way you're planning to measure things and the data plan and what is considered a good or a bad benchmark. Do that up front so that when it comes time for you to be talking about these measurements later, you're in a defensible position. You can defend what you're saying. We've all agreed to this. We did the hard work of figuring out, what these metrics should be. Then key performance or key risk indicators. These are the things that generally get reported at the higher level, kind of summary level for people that need that point of view rather than a more detailed view. But key performance indicators to me are those that are going to tell you if certain solutions, certain match rates, attribute level match rates are improving or deteriorating. Key risk indicators are the things that you say and establish, if I hit this level with this particular metric, it's going to cause an action, and you predetermine sort of that action. If your address match rate or your phone match rate or your fraud rate overall as a percentage of the total event population hits some metric, then you should have a playbook already in place that says when we hit that key risk level, these things happen. These teams get pulled together. This is what we're going to do to dig in and research this. These are the kinds of reactions that we can take. These are the levers we have in the current system even, that we can take. These are partners that we can reach out to and get help and assistance, right? But that sort of needs to be established and just part of this overall reporting program. Lastly, ROI. There is a conversation to be had around prioritization of different solutions that you're paying for, friction that you're putting into the system that's costing you in one way or another, and really determining what is the overall return on your investment, the value for each decision you're making in that flow, right? So a couple things quickly about digital identity and how it differs from more traditional identity. Most of you have probably thought about this some, but good time to kind of pull up on this, right? Traditionally, identity, if someone asks, who are you? These are the sorts of things you would tell them. This is my name, here's my address. If a business is asking you or an agency is asking for more detail, these would be the attributes you would find, and these defined us, right? In the bureaus, especially name and address, date of birth, and social are the keys to identity within the bureau, right? But I'd ask you, how many of you have lived at your current address more than 2 years? More than 3 years? 5 years? 10 years? How about telephone numbers? How many of you have had the same telephone number for the last 2 years? How about the last 3 years? 5 years? 10 years? What about email addresses? Last 2 years? 3, 5, 10. So if you saw the hands, the point is some of the traditional identity elements that we've used are becoming less persistent than these new emerging points, right? And so we have to work on confidence levels around phone. There are some techniques for doing that. Confidence levels around emails, certainly some ways to do that too. A lot of partners that you could work with to get to that point. But the key message here is that the old way of doing things is evolving, and we need to be on board with that and figure that out. And I think some of the new guidance that's coming out is kind of teasing that direction, which is, I think, a good thing, right? When you move into the digital environment, there actually is a lot of other information that someone brings to the table. So in the traditional kind of interaction, it was those carbon-based PII points that we saw on the previous slide. When you go into the digital environment, suddenly you brought all of these other signals along with you that are represented in your device, right? And so you know a lot about location. You know a lot about choices that people have made, language settings perhaps, or what browsers they're using, what are they old browsers, are they in their current versions, are there signals about bot activity, are you seeing the same device being used over and over and over again for different identity information? There are all these new signals that come into play in the digital environment that can inform us and help us get to a risk-based approach that is also safe. And so I know that's a lot to unpack, and we can spend a lot of time with that. The other thing that's represented on this page, and kind of in the next slide as well, is that the traditional approach was sort of binary. Does this name match this address? Does this name match this? It's sort of a binary yes or no. What I think we're trending towards now is more of a gradient. You have high risk, you have low risk, you have high confidence, you have low confidence. And that should inform, the experiences that you're providing to the people that you're serving. And there's a lot of cost associated to the old binary approach, because if you remember the very first slide we looked at, or one of the first ones, there were these two competing categories of, reject the imposter versus allow the valid person. That binary approach necessarily means that you're going to reject a lot of people or put them through some funnel that requires them to do a lot more, right? And so the opportunity that having more data at the table here brings us is an opportunity to be more refined in our approach. And over time, even more refined and differentiated and segmented by these different risk gradients in terms of what you do with those different risks. So I think when you take this and you layer it into the whole metric conversation, most of you probably have some metrics around individual attribute matching and the rates that you get there. I think this explodes out. There's a lot more elements, data elements at the end of the day than there were previously. So I think we can make this presentation available to you afterwards. I know some of you are taking pictures, but we'll figure that out and make sure you have access to it as well, so you can consider it later. I'm going to fast forward through a couple of slides here and get to the meat of the matter, wrap this up a bit, and have some time for questions perhaps. So on the left-hand side, you see the same categories we talked about earlier. These are the goals that you're trying to get to, the outcomes that are common, right? But the circle on the right-hand side, the flow there is really what I would envision you doing in your organization. Defining metrics, settling on those with your internal stakeholders, making sure everyone's in agreement with those definitions. You have a plan for how you're going to get those definitions or those metrics over the course of time. You have a plan for what you're going to do when something explodes and doesn't go the way it should. You define it, you measure it on the cadence that you've agreed upon. You do analysis on the key things that are not in sync with what the benchmarks were, the previous trends were. You look at ways to continually improve. You need a platform that will allow you to do that. You need partners that you could talk to and say, hey, what's going on in the world? You know, what are you seeing happening at other agencies or with other institutions that we could learn from? So you're not totally in isolation in that regard. And then you have a way of controlling. Part of this is, the whole thing is part of your control environment, but having a tool where you can make changes is really key and critical. We've seen many cases this year where bot attacks have occurred, and the sheer volume at institutions has tripled, quadrupled in a day. Suddenly there's this spike, right? And you know almost intuitively that it's an automated attack that's going on. But how would you react to that? A lot of clients that they're geared up to send these high-risk events into a operational queue. What do you do when your queue gets flooded? It's almost a denial of service sort of attack, but on your operations team. Can they handle that sort of elevation and sudden referrals and sudden operational stuff they have to do? So that's part of the plan and the controls that I would suggest you think about. Lastly, we did create a white paper some time ago, and we can share this, or again, we'll share this in the presentation. These are the key kind of high-level metrics that most clients are using. So, total population is a count. What's your fraud rate? What's your attack rate? What's your referral rate? How much fraud are you detecting versus missing? And then some idea of what's the cost of missing a fraud. What's the cost of putting friction in front of a real person and treating them like a criminal. So that is a rush through some thoughts about how to define metrics that are key in this space. I'm Mike Thibodeau, and Tim Starkey is my partner in crime here in the back as well. Many of you probably know Tim, so we'd be glad to talk to you about this at any point during the conference, after this, or even after the conference is over. But in a couple minutes we have here, are there any questions that you have for me? I'd be glad to field some questions. It's after lunch. We're filling it. Well, great. We are available for questions as they come up. I know it's a lot to consider. You'll probably have questions that come to mind afterwards and want to ask them. We're available for that. I really appreciate your time and attention today. I hope you have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.